Hi, welcome to Peiwen's Note. Today, I'm very happy to introduce the wise and talented yoga master, director, and actor, Aaron Rajeev Kahn. Hi, Aaron.
Hi,
welcome
Peiwen.
to Taipei.
Thank you so much.
What have brought you here?
Well, what's bringing me here is Pure Yoga. And at Pure Yoga, as you know, I'm the Director of Learning and Development. And so I'll be working in Hong Kong, Taipei, Singapore, and Shanghai. And I'm coming just about every month for a while.
Aaron's class is wonderful. That not only that he's very precise, he's also humorous. And when we do the penfold movement, he'll make it as interesting as possible. So we won't leave.
I try.
Tell me, okay, you sort of have double careers. One is actor, but tell me about how old were you when you first started yoga?
So, yoga as we practice it in the studio, as most people practice it, I first started or tried when I was 21. And I'll be 39 next week, so it's about 18 years.
Oh, happy birthday.
Thank you. Yoga-related things I tried much younger. As an actor in training, my first acting teacher when I was 11 years old asked us as young students to meditate and was instructing us very strictly on meditation. So that goes much further back, but I didn't actually stick with it at 11 years old. I didn't become a meditator. I'd probably be a spiritual master, and there would be many, many more people interested in my classes or in this interview. I think there are some people who started that young, who started at age 6 or 8 or 10 years old, and usually, they become, they might even achieve their enlightenment, before they're 20 years old and become teachers like my teacher.
In year of 2000, you encountered with Baba Hari Das.
Yeah.
He's a silent monk. Tell me about it, and how long have you studied with him for?
Well, the encounter was somewhat, I don't want to say by chance, but it was the way I heard about him and his teaching was unusual. I was living in a community in Arizona called Arco Santi. Which, that's an experimental architecture community started by Paolo Soleri. And I was interested in that place because I have an interest in architecture and urbanism, and I'd brought my theater company there to work on a project in some isolation so we could actually be together in a place with space and time to develop a project. And I was working in the cafe, mopping the floor of the cafe, and there was a guy with long gray hair and a ponytail and a little goatee beard. And every time I got near him, he asked me a question about the community. And each time I was a little annoyed because the community at Arco Santi is not a very intentional community. It's kind of a hodgepodge of people with different interests, and some people with very little interest in the place, but they just like that part of the desert. And eventually he said, "Oh, your community doesn't sound like the one I come from." So I said, "Oh, you come from a community?" And he said, "Yeah, but we all practice yoga." And I had been practicing yoga on and off by that point for about 2 years, and I was very interested in it, but I hadn't gotten very serious. And that perked my ears up, and then I said, what kind of yoga? And he said, Ashtanga yoga. And at the time, I thought Ashtanga yoga was only Ashtanga Vinyasa yoga, the very fast, dynamic, strenuous kind of asana that I was practicing, and I got very excited. He said, "Yeah, we have a very special teacher, you should come check it out." And he gave me a newsletter, and I saw the newsletter, and I saw this old Indian man in a picture, and he had a long beard, and he didn't tell me very much, but he said, "We have a fantastic New Year's retreat, you should come for New Year's." So about, I don't remember how many months later, I was traveling across the country, and I was able to stop. My then girlfriend and I were able to stop there for one night and camp at that community. And we liked it. It was very beautiful. There were deer and flowers and garden. It was just a lovely place. But we were fighting, and it was not a very peaceful visit for us, and it was just...
What city was this?
Well, the center is near Santa Cruz, California. It's called Mount Madonna Center, and it's sort of between Watsonville and Gilroy, California. So it's on the summit of Mount Madonna overlooking the Monterey Bay. It looks right at Big Sur. It's
beautiful.
Absolutely gorgeous spot. And in the morning we were drying our tent on our car, and the woman who had checked us in and sort of taken care of our visit came out, and she was wearing all white, and she came out and she said, "Babaji's here, he wants to meet you." And my first thought was, this is freaky. Y'all can keep your Babaji to yourself. Like, I really was very suspicious, thinking it was very cult-like. And I said, "That's okay, we're gonna take off." And she said, your tent isn't even dry, come on, it'll just take 5 minutes. And I thought, no, we don't need to get more involved in this. And she grabbed me by the wrist and she said, "He specifically sent me out here to bring you in. He wants to meet you."
Oh my God.
So I was kind of freaked out. But I thought, okay, well, our tent isn't dry, that's true. And we went in, and he was eating lunch. He was surrounded by about 12 or 18 students. And he just looked up from his meal and smiled, and my knees more or less gave out. And I just sort of fell to my knees and stayed there for an hour and smiling like an idiot. It was very, very powerful. That was in 2000, September of 2000. And then between that meeting and the New Year's retreat that year, my girlfriend and I broke up in a big tumultuous breakup. And I really wanted to go back to the center and go to the New Year's retreat, and I did. And the same guy who had told me about the place many months before was there. And he set up a sort of interview with me and Babaji where I was able to ask some questions, and told me if I wanted a Sanskrit name, I had better do it now, because he said he's an old man. So if you want a Sanskrit name, do it now. And you write down your birth name and your birth date and time and place, and then you give that to him, and later on in the day or the next day he gives you a Sanskrit name, and in some cases also a mantra based on your Vedic astrology chart. So that's when I got the name Rajeev, which was January 1st, 2001.
2001, you have a new name called Rajeev. And did you change your passport?
So I didn't use the name for about 9 months. And then in my first yoga teacher training, which was again that Ashtanga Vinyasa, very dynamic kind of yoga practice, I did start using the name Rajeev in my first teacher training. And that was actually that started September 12th, 2001, sort of amazingly. The day after 9/11 was my first teacher training. And then in June, I think about June 2003, I changed my name in the courts and changed my passport and my social security card and all my credit cards, bank accounts, driver's license, everything. So that process took a while, and now it's 11 years I've had this name, and it's quite normal for me now.
Oh, that's amazing story. So you go back to India a lot. I know you teach there.
Yeah, lately I go back only to teach. I prefer to go back there and travel, or go back and travel and teach, but just depending on scheduling, the last couple of trips I've only been teaching in India and Sri Lanka. The last time I got to travel in those places was 2010. But I have a 10-year visa for India, so I go easily and often. And now that I live in Hong Kong, I hope to go more frequently. It's like America insofar as you can travel 2 or 3 months a year in India and never see the country. You know, I've seen a lot more of India than most Indians, and I know even in one state there's so much more to explore, and that's how foreigners feel about the United States, you know, that they could never see it all.
So what year was it when you become like a yoga teacher and instructor?
2002 was when that first teacher training finished. It was an 8-month, 254-hour training, I think. And I started, I would say, sort of dabbling in teaching in early 2002. And then later in 2002, I started offering regular classes. And I actually changed my focus from Ashtanga Vinyasa to a system called Anusara Yoga around 2003. And then I spent about 8 years getting my certification in Anusara, which was a very rigorous process. And Shortly after I got my certificate, I resigned from that school, and shortly after I resigned, that school had a major scandal and has sort of come through a fire and reinvented itself with a different structure that I no longer am associated with. But a lot of my teaching, a lot of the alignment that I teach, and a lot of the way that I teach comes from the way that I learned to teach in Anusara Yoga.
I understand you, about 7 years ago, you moved to Paris. Can you tell us why you moved there?
So, I'll keep this as brief as I can, but growing up in the United States, I never really felt like I fit in, and that may partly because I'm Jewish, and in the schools I was at in St. Paul, Minnesota, my family was sometimes the only Jewish family in the whole school. So there was that little weird isolation, but also I just noticed my friends and I often chose each other for what I felt were very superficial reasons, like we wore the same brand jeans, or we wore the same brand t-shirt or sunglasses, or the deepest things that would happen is we liked the same TV show or liked the same music. But I always felt it was a little bit superficial, and much, much younger, I started watching Doctor Who when I was in kindergarten, the British science fiction TV show.
Doctor Who?
Yeah, and I loved Doctor Who a lot when I was a kid. And
How old were you when you were watching it?
I started in kindergarten in first grade, so that would be like age 4 and 5,
Okay.
I think, maybe 6 at the oldest. And I would say I was a pretty obsessed Doctor Who fan for a number of years. But what I really liked was that his perspective always seemed sort of supranational or super planetary. Like he wasn't really connected to any particular country. He was always about exploring, and he was never about, killing or consuming. And I saw a lot of killing and consuming in America, and I didn't really feel attracted or attached to it. And so that goes really far back. And then more recently, I would say, as I became an actor between the ages of 11 and 13 and onward into high school and college, I always wished for an opportunity to study things and perform in things that were less commercial than what I saw in American theater and television and film. Most of that stuff comes from Europe. And I gradually learned that I'm a kind of a socialist. And that France is a place where socialism lives and thrives, depending on who you ask. Certainly, right now they're having lots of trouble with the economy because their socialism got so dominant. They need to do some rebalancing. But I was attracted for all those reasons, and also the romantic reasons that other people have to Paris.
It's the most romantic city in the whole world.
Yeah, and so finally, when I was 20, my puppetry mentor, I was studying puppetry in Vermont. I was about to finish my undergraduate, and I said, Eric, his name's Eric Bass, I said, Eric, where should I study after my undergrad? And he said, as far as I can tell, if I was a young actor with abilities like yours, there's only one place to study. He said, it's the École Internationale Théâtre Jacques Lecoq in Paris. And that was 1996. I got very interested in the school. The master died about 3.5, 4 years later while I was an apprentice at Touchstone Theater in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, where all the other actors in the company had studied at the Lecoq School. And so we performed at his memorial in Washington, D.C., and I met his widow, and she said, well, the school's going to continue, you should come.
Wow.
And for the next 5 or 6 years, I was doing other theater projects and teaching yoga and traveling. And finally, I decided, I had it's a now or never kind of thing. And I just really wanted to at least try. I didn't speak French. I didn't have the money for the school. But I just knew that if I didn't try, I would regret it. And I think I had already turned 30. And I was just thinking, soon I'll turn 40. And I have to go to this school. So in 2007, I moved to Paris and learned French and taught yoga. And in 2011, I enrolled in the school and attended. So really the Lecoq School was the inspiration, I would say.
How many years did it take you? Did you study in this school?
The school has a 2-year structure for those who are interested and invited, and a 3rd year for those who are invited, and that number's tiny. The number who do the 3rd year is tiny.
You did the
No, I actually did the first year, and then during the first year I had a very bad knee injury. My meniscus was torn. I was actually unable to do a lot of the physical work of the school.
Because of the yoga, right?
It was a combination of physical theater from my teenage years. We did some very extreme projects when I was younger, with a lot of. One was called Van Gogh, which was the autobiography or a biography of Van Gogh's life with 20 actors.
Oh, that's interesting.
That was a very powerful piece, but 20 actors, a pianist, and a slide projector. And we built physical constructions of everything. So all the set, all the scenery, all the props, they were all our bodies. And during Van Gogh's Nightmare, for example, we would launch actors into the air before their catch was set up. And I was launched and I landed on my locked knees once. So that, I think, was the initial injury back in '94. And then being too hard on myself in yoga, not doing the things that I teach you and other students to do. I either didn't know them or I was too egotistical and wanted to do hard poses even though it hurt me. And then finally, the Lecoq School, where I was a 34-year-old starting acrobatics for the first time in my life. So the combination of all the yoga practice, the previous injuries, the acrobatics, the teaching, it just took its toll. So during my first year at Lecoq, I had a knee injury. I was unable to participate in a certain amount of the second trimester, and then I had a knee surgery that semester. And I decided that I actually withdrew my name from consideration for the second year, because I knew that if they invited me to the second year, I would want to do it. But I also knew that I'd kind of got what I came for. I really felt like acting again for the first time after my first year. And I also knew that if they rejected me from the second year, I'd be very sad. So I just asked them not to tell me if I was invited or not. And I actually went back to the States and went back into acting for a time. But I'd been directing most of the last 15 years before that. So the reason why I say I felt like acting again is because I had a period of time where I was directing more than I was acting. I didn't really feel like acting that much. And then in the Lecoq School, they really reignited that fire, that what they would call the desire to play.
You connected with your inner self, again.
I think connected with the spark of play.
Right.
Like what a really powerful actor has is that connection to a sense of play. And it's not something you can teach. It's something that we all have as children and that actors learn to keep in touch with, or learn to stay spontaneous about getting back in touch with. And directors, I think, usually are a little more controlling and a little less spontaneous. So being with that faculty for that year, three times a week improvisation, once a week creating a new piece with a new group, and every single day movement analysis, movement study, twice a week acrobatics. It's very intense, 20 hours a week with the faculty for 9-10 months, yeah. It's a very, very intense school, and most of my favorite companies were formed out of that school, which is what made me want to study there.
It must be a wonderful school. You said, so now that you've been doing more director, are you more like a director instead of an actor, right?
Lately, I guess for the last, 16, 18 years, I've been directing more than acting, yeah. Yeah, but that doesn't mean I've been directing a lot. My group of collaborators and I make pieces sometimes less than once every 5 years. It depends on when we're together, when we have a project idea, when we have either a venue, a festival, or a residency to create something in. So though I've been directing a long time, my directing resume it's not like I'm directing 3 shows a year. It's more like I've directed probably less than 15 things in 18 years, let's say.
Yes, still a lot. Back to yoga a little bit. There's what would you suggest for a beginner that would like to start yoga?
It depends where they are, right? So if they're in a city or a suburb, they probably can find a yoga studio. And if they can find a yoga studio and a teacher that they like, that's traditional and probably the best way. If they don't have access to a studio or a teacher, there are yoga podcasts, yoga classes online, both video and audio. Pure is starting one next year called My Pure Online that will have pure yoga teachers teaching in Chinese and English. The most famous one is called yogaglow.com, and some of my friends who have been my teachers over the years have classes on that channel, which is a very well put together channel. But you know, the most inspiring things often are the books by the greats, like reading Autobiography of a Yogi by Yogananda, or Light on Yoga or Light on Life by Iyengar. My teacher Baba Haridas, the Ashtanga Yoga Primer, or any of these books by any of these people. I mean, it just depends. Yoga is a big, you know, there are many parts to yoga, and when we think about yoga, we tend to think about the postures, and that's one small part, maybe 1/8 or less than 1/8 of yoga.
Really?
So someone doesn't have to be physically fit to practice yoga. If they're attracted to it, they can find a yoga path that will be right for them and isn't necessarily physical. So, you know, really the desire to practice is all it takes, and then finding a book or a podcast or a teacher is probably the best.
That's great. What's your philosophy of life?
You know, I was inspired by this production of the Arabian Nights that I saw by Looking Glass Theater during the first Gulf War in 1991. And in the Arabian Nights, there's a tale called The Tale of Sympathy the Learned. And in that tale, a learned girl defrocks all of these wise men in this royal court. So she answers questions about mathematics and philosophy and geography and the Quran and all these different things. And at one point, one of the priests asks her, "What is the purpose of life?" And she says, "To cultivate enthusiasm." And he says, "That is an excellent answer." And I remembered that from the time that I first saw that play in Chicago. I remembered, like, that's about the best thing I can think of for why, like, what life could be for, to cultivate enthusiasm. You do it in a lot of different ways, you know, with music and with your family and with this show, interviewing people. I do it with yoga and theater and also with music.
By the way, Rajeev is a great singer. He's got a voice like opera singers.
Thank you. I love to sing. I've been singing since I was 10, so I love to sing. I sing every day, even if there's no audience or purpose. Yeah. So I would say my philosophy of life is to cultivate enthusiasm. And the name of my theater company in the United States is called the Laboratory for Enthusiastic Collaboration. So that name also came out of that same response of sympathy of the learned.
Okay, that's great. Any other sentence you want to give us? Any advice?
Advice.
Besides this,
I think breathing and moving is important.
Yes.
I usually say that.
When we hold in the difficult movement in the yoga class, we forgot to breathe. Yeah. But I also just mean, even if someone isn't doing yoga, you know, getting on a bicycle or going swimming or hiking, you know, I just, in case anybody's watching, sitting on a couch or in a chair and hasn't breathed and moved in a few days or weeks or months, go breathe and move. I can say, great. Go breathe and move, and everything will be better. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Aaron.
My pleasure.
And hope to see you in the near future in Taipei.
Absolutely, without a doubt.
Thank you for watching.
Thanks.